I know. Right. Are we on? Are we going now?
Ready? Thank you. Well, good morning. And it looks like, good morning. The Legislative Audit Commission's Evaluation Subcommittee can come to order. We have a quorum. And this morning, we are going to have our working session to narrow the list of evaluation topics to 10. I think just to give folks an overview of how we're going to do this, and I think we could probably do it quickly. We're going to have staff go through sort of the important materials that they spend time working on to help us make these decisions. And then I have a section about how we can suggestion about how we can proceed after that. So maybe I'll turn it over to you to just give us a summary of what we're looking at.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Jody Munson-Rodriguez. I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for OLA's Program Evaluation Division. And I'm just going to walk you really briefly through the information that you have in your packet so you know kind of what the intended use is for all of it. First, we just have the agenda. And as Chair Greenman was noting, this meeting is not to get us down to the final 5 that we will end up evaluating. It's just to kind of narrow the playing field. So we're hoping to get from 16, which we have right now, down to 10 topics. Those 10 topics we will then send out to all legislators to kind of gauge their interest in those topics. We'll do a survey and we'll provide you all with those results along with the rest of this information in 2 weeks to then make your final decisions on that. The next page we have is the topic selection criteria, and we did go over that information in the last meeting, but we just wanted to provide it for you as a reminder of what this separate criteria is that we're using when we are thinking about how promising or how useful we think that these evaluations could be to the state of Minnesota and to the legislature. Then we have our packet of all of the background papers that we put together. And this has the 16 topics that you all selected as semifinalists. And it has a little bit of information on each of those topic selection criteria for each of those. And I'll go over those in a moment if you'd like me to, but I'll just kind of keep going through the packet for right now. After that, we have a matrix, kind of this colorful matrix right now, because there's a lot of information tucked into those background papers. We wanted to give you kind of a 1-page shot at the information about them. So this just gives you our assessments of the separate criteria for each of the proposed topics, kind of in one, maybe somewhat digestible piece of paper. After that, we have a page called additional balance considerations. And I'll note we did end up with kind of topics with a good breadth of agencies and topics, but I did want to note at the top there, we do have 4 separate evaluations currently on the short list that all hit MDH, the Department of Health. And so you might want to think about that as you're narrowing so that we're not too concentrated in one place. And then that last piece of paper is just an assessment that OLA staff did in terms of looking at how promising we thought each of these evaluations were. And the way that we do that is by looking at the criteria and thinking about what kind of recommendations we think we could make, if there will be new information that we think that we can give you. And so the ones where we think that there's a high probability of recommendations, new information, they're kind of towards the top. The ones where that seems less promising, those are towards the bottom. So those are all the pieces of information in your packet. Would you like me to also go through the background papers?
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Yes, please.
Okay, great. So we have 16. I'm going to try to kind of buzz through them pretty quickly. But if you do have questions as I'm going along, you can either ask me as I'm going or at the end. And Auditor Randall and I would be happy to answer your questions. So at the top of our list, we have aggregate mining operations. Aggregate mining is extracting sand, gravel, crushed stone. It's a type of mining that doesn't produce the same kind of hazardous byproducts as some other types of mining, but it still does have kind of some physical disturbance surrounding it. And so we have received some interest in this topic. There are a number of active sites right now. As you can see, DNR has identified nearly 500 and 300 prospective ones. So given kind of the amount of sites, the amount of counties that affects, we think that makes for some interesting and useful across the state information if we were to dig into this. So we do think that this is one that has the information available. It has a scope that we could provide some useful recommendations. I'll move on to the bond proceeds and cancellation reports. This would focus on 2 reports that Minnesota Management and Budget is required to produce for the legislature. It is quite a narrow topic, but does have the potential to be pretty resource intensive because it would require a lot of kind of staff time digging into specific laws and reports and kind of doing some matching information. You note that the impact is kind of hard to gauge since the audience is mainly the legislature, but it is referring to projects that are throughout the state. And so it kind of depends on how you look at these reports, the impact that they could have. We noted that this one is feasible, but not particularly urgent. We haven't heard a lot of concerns around this. I'll move on to the Conservation Improvement Program. This is a collection of projects that are planned and executed by numerous utilities throughout the state. So the state sets goals and parameters around this program, and then the utilities use rates paid by the ratepayers to perform these projects. One thing I would note about this is it has been a long time since OLA has looked at it. It's been since 2005, but we're not sure that this is the best year to look at it. The legislature did just pass in 2021 the Minnesota Energy Conservation and Optimization Act, which made some pretty substantial changes to the program. There were some changes in both in targets and goals for the program, but also in activities that the program can encompass. And so we could use probably about a year of data to provide some information, but it might be useful to wait another year or 2 on this one to really get a full idea of how the program is doing. I'm going to move on now to what we've called COVID-19 testing contracts and billing. And I'm just going to step back for a moment here and note, I should have said this at the beginning. You'll see that for some of these projects, we are suggesting a name change and or some revised questions. That was based on our assessment of where we think we can add value, what's a scope that might be doable for us to actually provide some good, deep information. So this is one of those where we suggested a name change, and you'll almost never hear us say it, but we suggested broadening the scope a little bit. It was focused on Vault Health, but we think that if we were to look into this, it would be useful to look at all 11 of the companies that the state contracted with. This is one where we believe that we could do it with standard evaluation practices, but I would note that we did already do a special review on these specific questions for 2 companies, including Vault Health in 2021. And so this would likely provide a lot of the same information, although it may be updated and potentially for additional companies. With that, I'll move on to Department of Human Services. This is another one that we suggested narrowing. It was originally support to counties based on the questions that were proposed. We suggest narrowing that to the licensing division within DHS. And I will let you know if this is selected, we would need to narrow it even more. As you all know, DHS is a large agency that oversees many, many types of providers. And so within that licensing division, we would need to choose which providers we would focus kind of and drill down into looking at those. But as long as we kind of scope that appropriately, we think that that is a promising topic. Moving on to economic concentration in Minnesota. This would be looking at, as you know, markets that may be dominated by a small number of firms. And we suggested, in order to make this kind of into a more feasible topic for us, focusing more on Minnesota's antitrust law and the Attorney General's duties in enforcing that law. So you'll see we have some revised questions where we would focus in there to kind of look at that idea of economic concentration and focusing in on the questions where we think we could provide some value. Moving to the grant award processes, the Office of Grants Management has a number of policies that state agencies are required to follow when they award grants. And that includes some requirements for awarding grants. But as with most of the policies, they are somewhat broad. And so there's quite a bit of room for latitude in there. The questions that these pose are similar to, but somewhat different from some of the questions that we have answered in the past. I think I noted in our last meeting, we have done quite a bit of work on grants in the last few years. There's been a lot of interest. There's been a lot of attention. And so that's one place where we noted that the balance may be a little bit on the lower end, but this is a topic where I think that we could dig into a few of the questions that we didn't necessarily dig into as deeply as in the past. One thing I will note with this one is that not only each agency, but each grant oftentimes within the agency has its own award process. So there may be statutes surrounding some extra requirements for that. There may be federal law that's involved. And so this is another one that would require scoping. We would need to choose a small subset of grants within a small subset of agencies. And then we'd be able to provide some information on that. It would not necessarily be generalizable. Moving on to healthcare building ownership. And this one I will note is fairly similar to the next one, healthcare provider consolidation in Minnesota, in which each of these are a bit more of a research topic for providing kind of descriptive information rather than necessarily an evaluation of a state agency or program. This one is focused on the costs of facilities and how they may contribute to the total cost of providing healthcare. One thing I'll note is that the Department of Health doesn't keep centralized data on these types of buildings. And so it would be difficult for us to get our hands on any sort of broad amount of information. If we were to do anything here, it would likely just be on a case study approach. So that may provide some good deep information on a couple of cases, but it could also be quite limited. And then moving over to the consolidation, this one, again, this has to do with how consolidation of healthcare facilities can affect prices of healthcare. This one, we believe the MDH may have some relevant data on it, but in order to actually provide some of the answers that you may be looking for, I think you'd likely need an actuary. And so it's possible we would not be able to answer all of the questions that are of interest to the legislature. If we do, it may take a bit of extra time as we need to bring in some outside expertise. Moving on to Metro Mobility. Metro Mobility is the on-demand transit service run by the Metropolitan Council for individuals with disabilities and health considerations that don't allow them to use fixed transit. While Metro Mobility operates under federal law, so it's under the Americans with Disability Act, there are also a number of state regulations that it operates under. So it's kind of a joint partnership there. I'll note that ridership for Metro Mobility did dip during COVID-19 pandemic, but it has seen kind of a rebound. And one thing we note here is that with the aging of the Minnesota population, Met Council is suggesting that ridership will just continue to increase. So that's one place where we think that this is a timeliness issue that might be of interest to consider. We do think that this is a topic that we could do with our normal evaluation methods, and the information would be there. Moving on to the Minnesota Board of Public Defense. This is a judicial branch agency that provides public defense to certain individuals. You'll note, I think the most interesting thing about this one is that we have ranked all of the criteria as high. We have heard a number of concerns about this board in terms of management and other things. So we think that the impact, the timeliness would be high. We think that this is a type of evaluation that we could do within our resources and with standard evaluation techniques. So we think this one could be both timely and useful. Moving on to Minnesota Department of Health. This is another one that we kind of focused in on healthcare facilities licensing program. The original questions were quite broad. Again, looking at the notes that we received and the questions we received, we would suggest focusing those questions on the division's healthcare facilities licensing program so that we could dig into kind of one piece and provide you with some in-depth information. I'll note that OLA's 2018 evaluation report of Office of Health Facility Complaints did touch on an office within this division, but we believe that we could focus this evaluation on other aspects of the licensing process so that it would not be too duplicative. Next is Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. This is down payment assistance. So Minnesota Housing offers 2 down payment assistance and closing cost assistance loans to individuals that qualify. Again, this is one where we suggest revising the question. The original questions were geared more towards Minnesota Housing's multifamily big loans for apartments. They didn't necessarily apply to these types of programs. So we looked at some of the questions that existed in some of the other topics about Minnesota Housing and proposed some revised questions around this program. One thing I'll note is that while Minnesota Housing spent less than $5 million on this program last year, the governor has suggested a very large increase to the program. So that might kind of move into a timeliness situation where we could look at the program before it ramps up potentially and see if there's anything that could potentially be strengthened within the program. Almost there. Next, we have recidivism rates of adult felons. This is one where the Department of Corrections calculates recidivism rates based partially on requirements in law. There is a requirement in law that the department report on adult recidivism each year based on a 3-year study. This one I would note, because this report is already out in the public, because the Department of Corrections has a research team that is already focused on this, the amount of value we could provide is questionable. Potentially, if they have some really good data for us, we could dig into some places where they haven't, but that would kind of depend on the quality of the data available. Next is unemployment insurance fraud. As you all know, unemployment insurance has been of great interest to the legislature here, throughout the country. The state and the federal government has spent a large amount of money, as you can see in state resources, in the last couple of years in unemployment insurance. And there have been concerns nationwide about potential fraud in the program. That being said, I will note that OLA already has 2 active audits on this topic, including an IT audit that I think will provide some really good information about some of the questions here. And then last, we'll take a look at worker misclassification. This has to do with the classification of workers as employees, independent contractors, consultants, or other types. And this can have a wide variety of effects on the worker, including their ability to obtain workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, and those types of things. One thing that we noted that is, I think, part of the timeliness consideration here is since our 2007 report, there's been a large increase in kind of informal work in the gig economy. And so that might be a place where we can take a look at what has changed since then, see to the extent to which our past recommendations have been implemented. So we think it's a big topic, it's complex, but I think that with appropriate scoping, it could be an important one too. So that is my spiel. I am happy to answer any questions if you have them, or go ahead and let me know if I can help.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. And does anybody have any questions before I propose sort of how I think we can get to the nitty gritty of our work? Okay, great. Here's what I propose we do. I think, and based on your summary, if you look at the sort of evaluative, the document with the arrow from most promising to least promising, my suggestion is we take the top 5 and accept them, and then we talk about the other 2 boxes. Is there any discussion to that, Representative Hanson?
I'm sure I would move the top 5 be presented to the legislature for consideration.
Any discussion to the motion? Representative Quam.
Thank you. The issue I have with Metro Mobility is it's called Metro and they're talking Met Council. And frankly, this is very tied into the non-emergency medical transport, which is an issue hitting a lot of the greater Minnesota, I think more than the Metro. Because, frankly, there are reasons why when you got the concentration, they're easier to deliver. And I'm not sure how to best improve that. But frankly, when I think of the non-emergency medical transport and the disabled transport, I think the Metro is probably better set up than anywhere else in the state because of the concentrations and the existing resources. And I think if we're going to look at that type of a topic, it needs to be less focused on where there's less of a problem and more focused on what the issues causing, failures in the rest of the state.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't disagree with Representative Quam that non-emergency medical transportation is an issue that's been a vexing issue for a long time statewide. I would view Metro Mobility as something somewhat different. Metro Mobility trips are sometimes taken to medical appointments, but they're also used for everything that clients of Metro Mobility use. So they are similar, but not the same. I don't know how to reconcile the points that Representative Quam is making other than to suggest that NEMT be sliced out as a separate evaluation. I mean, this has been an issue that has, I think, a working group and a task force has worked on around the legislature with no resolution. It's very, very contentious for a number of years. That said, Metro Mobility in the metro area, I would disagree with some of the characterization of Representative Quam's that there aren't problems or problems that are to a great degree. Metro Mobility has serious functionality and service quality issues for the people who use it. Whether they're going to medical appointments or coming to the Capitol to lobby us or going to social events or work or you name it. I get a lot of calls about the problems with Metro Mobility from my constituents and of course being chair of transportation from a whole lot of other people. And I have no idea how to get my arms around it. We've got some a pilot suggestion in the transportation bill that's being proposed. We talked about just going to Uber and Lyft. So maybe I don't know how to resolve this. Maybe we can toss it to the legislative auditor for some suggestions because the NEMT is worthy of an evaluation. I just don't think it's exclusive of this kind of evaluation of METMO.
I'm going to go before Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we've had NMT on the schedule for several years, but I think where we're at right now is we've narrowed from 132 to 16. And we've had most promising to least promising. So metro mobility as well as 4 other topics are encouraged as being more promising than others. And so, as a maker of the motion, I took the ones that are most promising here. And again, this isn't the final cut. Maybe this is a discussion on whether or not to include metro mobility at the final cut, but sending it out to the members, we don't know what 201 legislators are going to say. Maybe they feel metro mobility is not that important and they really, really love aggregate mining operations as a topic. So I would ask for support for the top 5, just because I think we've come through the process. We've got the most promising, and I think it is an important topic that's broader. And often we don't look just at the Met Council or the metro area where 60% of the population and provide service. So I would encourage still support for the motion. I understand where you're coming from, Representative Plum, and I think that I know that those are very vexing problems with non-emergency transport. And as Senator Dibble said, there have been efforts and efforts and efforts on that. I think we haven't had the effort on metro mobility, and it would be important for the auditor to consider that, and for the legislators to consider that, send it out for the feedback.
Auditor Randall or Deputy Auditor Rodriguez, do you guys have any input on that question?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is Judy Randall, Legislative Auditor. Representative Kwame, you raised a good point that there are a lot of concerns around the non-emergency medical transportation services. OLA did do an evaluation related to that. I want to say in the last 10 years. I was just going to try and call it up. So I can certainly share that evaluation with you. Doesn't mean it's not still an issue, but it is something that OLA has looked at. I will note related to metro mobility that prior to COVID, there were a lot of concerns about the timeliness of response and people scheduling the rides and then not showing up and no accountability. And there were a large number of concerns. Then COVID hit. And so those concerns kind of quieted, and metro mobility didn't rise to the top of our topics then for a couple of years. I think now that folks are going out and about again, I think it is a worthy topic. That's not to say that non-emergency medical transportation isn't, but it is something that we have looked at again in the recent past. At this point, I think it would be, certainly the commission can do whatever it wants. If you want to suggest a new topic and we flesh it out, we can do that. But that's not exactly where we are in the current process.
Thank you. Senator Barr, you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry. So would it be practical to do a metro mobility audit simultaneously with a non-emergency medical transport, kind of work the two of them together? I mean, metro mobility is one thing, and then we have the rural side of the other, but in the metro, we use the metro mobility for both things, and like maybe trade in one of the other topics. Just curious. Sorry if you are just answered that.
Okay.
Auditor Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Barr. Well, what I was saying is that we did do an evaluation of the non-emergency medical transportation system in the last 10 years. I'm trying to pull it up, but it's hard to do that while I'm testifying. Yeah. They would be 2 different evaluations. I don't know that there would be much synergy in doing them at the same time. We can certainly do it. It would replace one of the other ones, right? It wouldn't be a merger and one huge one. That's all. And it's certainly, we haven't done the background work on it, but we could pull that together. And if members wanted to put it on the survey to gauge interest, and then when we reconvene, we could have more information for you at that time. It's certainly the commission's prerogative to do that.
Thank you, Auditor Randall. And I would just say that it wasn't on the topic of 131 that we narrowed down to 16. So I would I lean against reopening up that process. And I think the conversation about whether we put metro mobility in the top 5 seems like it's a slightly different question than whether we've had an additional one that we've done an audit in the last 10 years, and also that wasn't on our original list that we narrowed down to. Representative Quam, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The main issue was, out of all the mobility entities, I think there are more issues and problems outside of the metro mobility than inside of it. The non-emergency medical transport is because there's quite a bit of overlap in the two. There are improvements. Well, three pilots, I think we've looked at funding to transportation on micro transit and like an app-based, which would help a lot with the disabled mobility aspect. But my main concern was, if we audit the best case, I think, in the state, we might miss issues that are in the greater state for disabled transport. And just focusing on the metro one, or the one that's functioning best, may not give us the answers we need across the state. And that was a main emphasis. I brought the other one on because of the, in a lot of cases, that type of transport is also a main provider of non-emergency. But thank you.
Any further discussion to the, yes, we have a motion to put these top 5. What I heard from the auditor is we can't consolidate them. They're different topics, they're different evaluations. It sounds like there's some interest in looking at the what is it? The NEMT, but that was not a part of the process. This process, it did not make it, was not suggested by the citizens or legislators. So I guess I would up the motion.
Madam Chair,
Senator Cran.
if I could, if we could just modify the motion and looking at the value provided by the assessment. If we just took and added to the top 10, literally the top 10 of what's on the evaluation as far as most promising, and pick the 10 most promising, which would mean we'd drop the conservation improvement program from that point on down. And we would have literally the top 10 of what has been deemed by the assessment as the most valuable or the most probable to provide high value outcomes. If you would accept that motion, we would agree.
Thank you, Senator Cran. I am actually, after digging into this, interested in the economic concentration in Minnesota, which is, I think, 11. So I did want to look at a couple of those because I know it's just a spectrum. So I would, if you would be okay with taking the top 5 and then discussing, we haven't had any discussion on the bottom 11, and go from there. I know we have 20 minutes left to 25 minutes left. But would that work? Basically just taking the top 5.
Madam Chair, at this point, we all have other projects on here that we would like to do. So we can further the conversation in after this motion, which we will need to do on the totality of the top 10. But at this point, not ready to accept the top 5 without ensuring that we have these top 5. If you look at balance and where they came from the perspective of balance within our selection, that there isn't any balance in the top 5. And so I want to make sure that, again, there's other things I want, but based on the value, we would accept the top 10, or we'll continue the debate for the next 20 minutes.
Thank you, Senator Cran. Then I would like to propose that we actually, in our overview conversation, look at a few. To your point, I will not move forward on the motion for the top 5. I would like to potentially just eliminate some of the. I think we heard from the auditor there were some topics that either were redundant or currently in progress or may not lead to evaluation. So With that, I think we can probably get to 10 pretty quickly, but, I want to start by just, it sounded like there were a few audits that are either sort of have been largely addressed in the last couple of years or are currently, ongoing, that we're already looking at. Can we talk about those topics?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we currently are doing 2 separate audits on unemployment insurance fraud. As I noted, one of those is an IT audit. We believe that the questions posed will largely be answered through work that we are currently doing there. As I noted, within COVID-19 testing contracts, we released a special review looking at those specific questions that are posed for 2 of the testing companies, including Vault Health in 2021. And I think those are the 2 that had the most recent work that had been done by OLA.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Crane.
There's
Or thank you, Senator
Madam Chair,
Crane.
that's kind of what I went through as well, and those that either are currently active or recent, as well as those that are low value. And it kind of rolls back to the OLA assessment. And so that's what I did and tried to go, those that were already inactive, which it's either redundant or very low value based on the effort. And so we get the greatest value at, I think, really, as they've laid it out, those top 10. Because I think in the conservation program, I think that was also one that was, timeline is low, fees really low, and poor timing from the opportunity. So that's why I cut it at there. And then I think we fairly decent balance with the top 10 moving into our selection for today.
Senator Dibble.
I have a suggestion.
Senator Dibble.
Madam Chair, would it be unheard of to put 12 in front of the full legislature? We could drop off the bottom 4, and take the top 12.
Auditor Randall. And I think that given what Senator Crane said, which I agree, which is, it sounds like the conservation improvement program may be better for next year, when we have a little bit more data, because we only have a year of data. I might sort of amend the question and say, can we do the top 11, not including the conservation improvement program?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Short answer is yes. You can put forward as many as you want on the survey. I think the other side of that is that members get excited about some of the topics, and then that means that's one more that we won't ultimately select. Obviously, we can explain that to members, and it's not that big of a deal. So short answer, yes, you can put however many you want on the survey.
Thank you, Senator Kwong, or Representative Kwong. Sorry for the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe you just want me in the other chamber. The recidivism rate in adult felons, I think that was mentioned, that there's already a report that basically covers that. So I think that would be less, that we don't have to have, 11 or 12. If you see where I'm going.
Yep. So can I read, and I see Senator Barr. Did you have something to say? I think that with Representative Kwong's point, I think we might be able to get to 10 in a way. Maybe Senator Cran, you'll agree to.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
Taking that.
Senator Barr.
Thank you. I was kind of thinking the same thing, drop to the bottom 4, and you seem to want to dig into the economic concentration a little more. I would also drop the SIP, or the Conservation Improvement Program, because there's so many changes recently, and also the recidivism rate, that puts us toward 10, doesn't it? If you drop recidivism, conservation in the bottom 4.
That does, if I'm counting. So just to be clear what we're talking about, the top 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, down to bond proceeds, and then economic concentration is 10, would be the 10. Okay, so I see thumbs up. So does somebody want to make the motion? Thank you, Representative Hanson, and I don't know if we have to withdraw the previous motion or not.
Maybe I'll restate, Madam Chair, I would restate my motion. So it would be For the record, Minnesota Board of Public Defense, Minnesota Department of Health, Healthcare Facilities Licensing Program, Aggregate Mining Operations, Metro Mobility, Worker Misclassification, Grant Award Proceeds, Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, Department of Human Services Licensing Program, Bond Proceeds, and Economic Concentration.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and we have our 10. And maybe I'll turn it back over to you to tell us what, or to the auditor team to tell us what happens next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so we will take these 10 topics, send out a survey to all legislators either this afternoon or tomorrow morning, and offer them an opportunity to comment and vote for, I believe, their top 3 picks. So we'll send out something now. I know that you all have a break, so we'll send a reminder at the end of the break to ensure that we're reminding people about it. And then we will compile that information for you all to provide it to you at our meeting in 2 weeks, which then you'll have that information as well as all the info here to make a final decision on the 5 that we'll move forward with this year.
And Deputy Auditor Rodriguez, can you just repeat the deadline with which we are going to have to whip our legislative colleagues to fill out the form?
Yes, it is.
Madam Chair, we will communicate that to you, but it will be after the break and we will be able to send several reminders regarding the survey. I also just wanted to note that on the 17th, that is when the subcommittee will come together, use all the information you have, identify the final 5 to recommend to the full commission. The full commission will meet immediately after the subcommittee meets to hear the conversation, approve the final 5. And then we will also be discussing at that point our evaluation report on rent help MN, just so you know. So that will be a very full agenda. We will try to move expediently during that committee hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Barr, any final?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
announcements?
So just to clarify,
Questions?
approximately 10 days to whip our fellows, give or take a day. Got it. Thanks.
I think that, Madam Chair, I believe that we'll be asking for the results of the survey the Friday prior, so around the 14th.
Thank you. We obviously have a lot of cats to herd and a lot of stuff going on. So really appreciate your work on this. Really appreciate the committee's work to get us in with 15 minutes left to spare. So with that, unless anybody has anything else, we are adjourned.